Well, welcome everyone. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about maybe some best practices or ideas sharing about being a treasurer for a church. And I'm Dory Carlson. I'm an optometrist by day, and I'm a financial secretary for Our Savior's Lutheran Church in Park River, North Dakota, on the other times that I'm not seeing patients. And Paul?
And I'm the director of operations for First Lutheran Church here in Detroit Lakes.
And you're an accountant, if I remember correctly, correct? You have an accounting
Yes,
degree?
yes.
Awesome.
Go Bemidji State.
So, coming from the perspective of an accountant and a small business owner, and our church has a budget of a couple of thousand, excuse me if I can speak. Our church has a budget of about $200,000.
And our budget is over close to about 700,000.
Okay. And so we're trying to make it so that, one size doesn't fit all. So hopefully some of our ideas tonight might give you some ideas about how to make your lives easier and just be good stewardship for our churches.
For sure.
Our agenda is why are systems important? What are the best practices for churches? Idea sharing is the big one, and any questions that might come up along the way. So, churches are unique because they're a very high trust environment. Lots of times there's volunteers that are doing most of the work for the church. There's not as many internal controls, and especially depending upon the size of the church, that might be really true for some of the smaller churches. And then, of course, we have a biblical emphasis on giving grace and our governance. And so sometimes that makes churches sort of unique in their situations. It also makes churches a really high risk for embezzlement. And there's some stories we're going to tell you here in a little bit, but we have to remember that embezzlement is not necessarily created by or committed by bad people, but by trusted people that might be under pressure or life circumstances that come around and they're given an opportunity. So we just have to be careful with that. Edmore, there, North Dakota, there was a pastor a few years ago that ended up embezzling about $35,000 from High Plains Ministry. Um, and I'm kind of geeky about this, and Paul knows this because we've talked about this. Whenever this happens, as a small business owner, I'm always wondering, like, okay, how did they do it? Do we have something in place that could have made this a little bit more difficult? And so in this particular case, Pastor Reynolds submitted expenses and false charges that he then received reimbursements for from the church. There was a treasurer in Fordville, North Dakota for the volunteer ambulance service and was charged with embezzlement of more than $20,000. That how she did it was she wrote numerous checks for cash, and that's what they put in the paper. But I also know just because of being in this small community, she had several expenses that she had put on credit cards that were personal expenses. And then there was Devil's Lake Eye Clinic that had their office manager embezzle nearly $350,000 in cash deposits. In that case, what happened was she was the same person that was paying the bills and also doing the deposits. So when she would go to do the deposits, she would just take the cash out of the bank bag and just decide that that was something that she wanted to keep for herself. The irony part of the first three stories here is that the first story, his wife babysat my kids. The second story, we employed that individual for a period of time. And this third story happened to come from friends of ours.
I think that really goes to show that how embezzlement and so these fraud situations just literally affect so many people. And it's
Absolutely.
so widespread.
Absolutely. And then we have one last case that hit the news a couple of weeks ago. And this individual embezzled nearly $640,000. And what she did is she opened a credit card uh, under the church's tax ID number and had the statement sent to her house so that the church never saw that credit card statement and then proceeded to do personal charges that were for personal items for vacations and clothing and whatnot. So the concern that there is that with one person controls many things. If you have the same person who is doing the deposits, doing the bookkeeping, reconciling the accounts, is creating expenses without receipts, those are kind of the red flags. And so no consistent financial reporting. And so as we go tonight, Paul and I are just going to kind of share some ideas that maybe would help a little bit in some of these situations. The other flags or warning signs are that people get defensive about financial questions. I read in the newspaper about the woman who had the credit card statement that somebody was asking her for the bank statements and she kept coming up with reasons why she couldn't give them or that she would get them but then never did. I used to work in a bank for a short period of time, and one of the things about the banking system was that they required employees of the bank to take days off consecutively so that if there was something going on that wasn't appropriate, that potentially they could catch it. So bank employees had to take at least a week off at a time, not a day here or a day there. And then the other red flag is when somebody insists that they're the only ones that can do it. Just that happens a lot because people don't want to hand over control. And so then they'll say that they can do this, and that just sets up some red flags. And some final red flags are that we've always done it this way. The numbers are just a summary that there's no true financial reports. And we're going to go into what we should be reporting regularly. And then the financial reports are just late or really incomplete. So, what are the best practices? And remember, when we talk about this, it's not just to protect the church, but also to protect the staff. In cases where there's not as many people that are working with the books or the offering and such, if something's wrong, that really sets it up so that the staff member is the first one that's going to get blamed. And so it's not about just the church, but it's also protecting our staff members as well. No one really intends to do wrong.
Exactly, exactly. And I also think another story that is really important to emphasize that this protection goes both ways is that locally here in Minnesota, there was a small town where a city official noticed a discrepancy, and then they followed the procedures and reported that there was like potentially some uh, malfeasance going on. Later investigations found out that, oh, this actually it was not a best practice, but you already had newspaper articles and stories about this event happening. And so it's also really important to kind of protect people's professional relationships.
Sure.
Um, so when we do find something that is wrong, that like it's not just being absent-minded.
That reminds me, last year we had some questions about something going on with some of our numbers for our business. And we realized that it was a mistake. It was an accounting error. No, but it also brought up a great conversation with some of my employees that, I just said and was pretty open and honest, saying I was really worried that there was something going on that wasn't in our best practices, but realized it was just an accounting error. But it created a dialogue that everybody just kind of like reminded of why we do things the way we do.
Exactly. As the accounting major in the room, from our auditing class, I just want to let everyone know that auditors love separation of duty, they love documentation, and they love internal controls. And it's not that auditors have an issue with control. What they view is when they look at accounting systems and how businesses operate, they try to think of all the ways that um, the system should work to protect the owners, to protect the stakeholders in the affair. Um, and so they look at systems and have a whole like, I mean, there's the generally accepted auditing standards. Um, so the core principles that auditors are going to look at um, are going to be that we can apply here to our church context here are going to be those sort of three things of separating duties, which is going back to having more than just one person doing the accounting tasks. Documentation is a huge part because usually fraud and accidents isn't discovered until way later. So it's really important to keep that documentation up to date. And then finally, internal controls are just what are the processes that we have in place in our organization to protect ourselves and just to keep everyone operating honestly.
Paul, with your size budget with your church, do you actually have a formal audit for your church?
We do not.
And neither do we.
Um, yeah. I think larger churches also, it can depend on their relationship that they might have with an audit firm because audits, when we priced it out in 2020, 2022, audits could range anywhere from 15 to $25,000.
They're expensive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Just curious. I think the big part is that systems, right? There needs to be some sort of accounting system. And, just depending upon the size of your church, depending upon your budget, makes a difference as what you end up using. In our church, we use QuickBooks Online and we use Excel spreadsheets for our, documentation and budgetary purposes. Paul, I
Yeah.
know you use
And
something.
yeah, here at First Lutheran, we use Icon CMO for our financials. I know that there are other churches that use Icon for their financials and also managing their members. Um, but we found that system really to be helpful to help us track um, our funds and accounts and even kind of compare things right up to the budget. Um, so I think it's really important also when we're talking about um, this accounting work that we should strive to becoming to move towards some sort of computerized system. Because yes, we can do the accounts like on paper ledgers, which is probably still really common in really smaller churches. And for them, it probably works out fine. Um, but I also want to say that like when you try to find a next person to kind of like do the books, paper bookkeeping is still it's getting to be an artisanal skill.
It's tedious.
Yes. And so when you can kind of like when your church can decide, all right, we're going to go to QuickBooks, then if you have to find a new treasurer, you can find someone that has like, oh, I use QuickBooks for my business or I worked at it at my job. So it just becomes easier to find the next person to kind of carry the torch.
And I think it's just the cost of doing business. If you're going to be in a church and you're handling money, and especially if you're doing payroll, it's just part of what's necessary.
Exactly. Exactly. And today we have donors that really expect that level of trust and confidence in the organizations they support.
It's a good point. Your data is only as good as if it's backed up and stored, and I would highly recommend stored in the cloud. So we had a situation a couple of summers ago that our secretary at our church was asked for the directory PDF, thinking that it was for a baby shower. And so she sent out our directory to this person who was more nefarious and was not a member of our church, but just posed as one. They're very good, which is kind of scary. But along that process, our members started getting requests for gift cards and being targeted a little bit for different things for asking for money. But also in that process, somehow our entire hard drive went down at the church. So our pastor has her computer, their church office has a separate computer, and it was our church office computer that hard drive was basically wiped out. Thankfully, that we had everything backed up on Carbonite, and we were able to download a whole file. So we replicated our entire hard drive. But the big thing, because we use QuickBooks Online, never once was our financials ever involved. Because it's stored in the cloud, we never had to worry about something happening to our financials, which was something I would really recommend after having gone through trying to redo our entire hard drive. Back up your data.
Yes. Yeah. So for the folks that are using their QuickBooks desktop and love it, I do want my big recommendation is think about moving over to QuickBooks Online. As churches in the United States, we are 501c3 nonprofits. So be sure to take advantage of tools like TechSoup.org to get discounts on necessary software, whether it's going to be QuickBooks Online or it's going to be an antivirus product. Um, Make sure to take advantage of those discounts to kind of get these best of breed tools that you
Can you
can
say
use.
that name again?
Yeah, it's TechSoup.org. So yeah, tons of great resources there. And if you do need help getting like the necessary 501c3 documentation, If you Google it, you can find it on the ELCA, but ask someone at the Synod because they deal with it all the time.
Right. I've asked for that and they had it out to us real quickly. So consider dual signatures. The process with dual signatures is, yes, it slows down the process because you have to get two signatures for all of your checks. But at that point, what's happened is two people have actually looked at it or seen the money go out. That's the big part of it. I was asked one time if the banks can enforce this, saying that they couldn't necessarily enforce the dual signatures. But I don't think that's really the point. Yes, if somebody was being less than honest and trying to get signatures to go through on just one, it probably would go through. But the point is it's about processes and systems. If you have the system and the process that two people sign the checks, you've had more eyes on the business.
Yeah, excellent. And I also think this is another example of looking at sort of your church's risk tolerance for like how comfortable are we um, with this? Because I mean, again, you can the old adage goes that you can make a door so secure that it's just easier to go through a wall. So there's the other end of like
Mhm.
we have so many systems and processes in place that it just becomes too difficult to work, and people then just circumvent it. But yeah, I really agree that having that internal process of being like, oh, we need two people to sign checks. One, it keeps people honest, and two, in the event of when people have been victims of scams, that having that two signature check stop right there, you're going to have two other eyes that are going to look at this check and be like, oh, we probably shouldn't do this because this doesn't sound
Like a
reasonable.
legitimate charge. Yeah. And what we do with our church is we have council members, like we'll have our council chair and vice chair, the other secretary that's in our church plus myself have be one of the possible signatures. So it's not just two signatures that only those two people can sign, but we've got a few people that are able to sign.
Yeah. And also make sure I sometimes forget after a month or two after our annual elections, but also make sure you update the signatory cards on file with your bank because sometimes there can be some names that shouldn't be on there anymore.
And you're right. I usually remember like a few weeks later.
Yep.
Receipts for credit card purchases. My pastor, she knows me by now because I come to like track her down and say, all right, this came on the credit card. I need to know what account this is for and where's the receipts because I haven't had any. And this is just such a common, easy one for people to put personal expenses on credit cards. If you don't ask for the receipts, you need to know what it's for.
And it's also important too that like I know at restaurants sometimes when you will use your card, you'll get the final like signature copy where it's gonna have like total and tip amount. But it's important also to remind people that when you provide the documentation, that documentation really has to describe what happened. That so let's say a pastor goes and has coffee with one of their members, and they just bring you the signed slip from the local coffee shop that, they could say, oh, I was having coffee, with this other person. And that receipt then can kind of document the story that they're telling to make sure that it makes sense. And also, don't pay off of a statement. So when a statement comes in, make sure you can find that invoice. Um, because I accidentally paid another First Lutheran Church's bill one
Oh,
time because I
oops.
saw the statement. So yeah, again, another reason to have systems in place and learn from our learning opportunities.
Right. Do as I say, not as I do.
Yep. um, Speaking of paying off statements and invoices, I think it's really important to have like an invoice approval or review process. Um, Again, it kind of separates those duties from the person sending out the checks, receiving the mail, reviewing them, to kind of share that responsibility, share that leadership with other people's. Um, and for your church, it may be different. Some churches may um, maybe their risk tolerance is maybe a little bit more, that maybe they have a council that's really going to be active and involved in looking at things. Or maybe they have a council that just kind of spends a little bit of time on the financials, so they might want to implement more checks, on the backside. Um, but it really depends on, what level of risk tolerance you have. Um, and then again, how much process do you want to add into something? Again, keeping in mind that we don't want to have a system that is so cumbersome it becomes difficult to work.
Right. There's got to be a happy medium.
Yeah.
So this is in here because not in this particular synod in Minnesota or Eastern North Dakota, but I've heard stories from other pastors that, especially in small churches, that somebody walks up to the offering plate at the end of the church and takes the offering, puts it into her purse, and walks home and counts the offering. I don't think that that's necessarily a good practice.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of room for improvement there. So the important thing is we want to make sure that especially when we're dealing with cash, things that can easily just be removed.
Disappear.
You want to make sure that we've got two physical people watching things.
So, and especially if it's not the same person that's paying bills, that's probably even worse if that person's going up and just doing the offering counting. So let's talk about counting offering. That's a big thing that happens. There's lots of cash typically with our offering plates. And so, as Paul was saying, it's really good that if you have a couple of people, and every church does it differently. I've already heard many stories of different ways in which they did it. But some people have regular volunteers. We rotate through our council members. So the council members will immediately count the offering and do the deposit and the night deposit right after our church service. Typically, a couple of people are there. They sign off on a sheet. They have a sheet that they fill out for, envelope offering, non-envelope offering, and whatever other miscellaneous things that might be there. And then they sign so that we know who actually was counting the offering that day. What do you do, Paul?
We have regular volunteers that come in, so our ushers will put it in an envelope, and then we have a drop safe that they just drop it in, and then the volunteers come in and
Like on the Monday after church or?
yep,
Okay.
exactly, exactly. And so we have a sheet that like summarizes the count, and then our counters sign it, then I sign it after I review it, and then I have another person that double checks all of it to just make sure that all of these totals match. Um, and since this is kind of a stewardship season, I also want to plug that this sort of like volunteer opportunity, it's an important one, but I also want to emphasize that for some people that maybe want to be involved in the church, but maybe they don't want to read on Sunday, or maybe they love the back office kind of things, that getting involved in something like this can be a great opportunity for people who might not normally be like the volunteers that you think of for your church. So us nerds, we love to volunteer.
Well, and there's all kinds of ideas, right? Because we used to do that similar thing, but as our congregation was starting to get older, and then we also have people that are still in the workforce, the selection of people who could come in on those Mondays after church got fewer and fewer people, or some of our regular volunteers were just getting tired. So that's why we decided to switch it around because we were having troubles finding people to be able to come in on the Mondays after church because of other folks being at work. So this is why we decided to kind of do it on that Sunday right afterwards and rotate people around. So no right or wrong, lots of different ideas.
So now we kind of talked on the front end in terms of like the bookkeeping and controls around that, around like receiving offering and paying expenses. And kind of the back half of it is now going to be monthly reporting. Um, this is the one of the core, I would say bookkeeping and then also just simply the reporting are the two core um, important skills in quality treasurer work. Um, and so the reporting really it's trying to answer this question of how can we tell the story of our church through these numbers. Um, we can describe it as how much money came in, how much money went out, how much money do we have, And then when you can look at budgets, you can kind of compare how close were we on our estimates. Did we think that, we were going to do a project, but maybe that changed? And so when you have this sort of monthly or regular, absolutely regular reporting, this is where that kind of activity happens.
And I think this is really crucial to have a system of monthly reporting. And we're going to talk about what that system might look like. But I think this is one of the most imperative things that you actually give to your council so that your council can make informed decisions and somebody knows what's happening financially for the church.
Yep, exactly. And so when I told the QuickBooks desktop people to upgrade to QuickBooks Online, I'm going to tell the paper bookkeeping folks that when you have a software package, making these reports is much, much easier.
Right.
So the first kind of report that we're going to go over is going to be called the income statement. I'm probably going to use more for-profit accounting terms here, just because if you're watching this and in our audience too, that you probably have more experience on the for-profit accounting side, like you either do it for yourself or someone else. Things like income statement, balance sheet, profit and loss, they're all terms that sound familiar. So income statement here is what its purpose is to describe what happened, like what went in, what went out during a block of time. So these reports um, kind of snapshot. They give you this little um, window that you can look in the transactions that happen. Um, Also, this is a report that is really good to compare to either prior years or prior months, just so you can kind of see, all right, in December of 2025, is that similar or dissimilar to December of 2024, which can really help your councils better understand the numbers that are coming in. And to kind of read these reports, I'm kind of going to go through the major sections that we have here. It's first, when you first print it from your accounting software, it's going to tell you what is the time period that we're dealing with. Um, so it'll either say like for the month or the year to date, but that just tells you how much data is going to be contained. It's also going to, if it's a comparison report, it's going to denote what period we're looking at, whether it's going to be this current year or maybe the same time period but last year. The top half of the report is revenue. This is really going to be what is the money that comes in. You're going to see on the left side, these are just your accounts in your software. These help you categorize what kinds of revenue are coming in. Hopefully, churches aren't just saying this is offering or this is revenue, because you might want to be like, oh, how much is coming in electronically, or how much is people have made pledges. How is that coming in? So this is where you can kind of see that differentiation. The next part is going to be your expenses. This is going to be the money that's going out. We'll talk a little bit about how to set up a chart of accounts in a little bit later, but this again is just going to show the categories of the money that has been spent. Again, looking at our current period and the period last year. And then finally at the bottom, specifically in for-profit accounting software, or if you use something like Quicken, it's going to have like a profit or loss. And for us in the nonprofit world, in the church world, that might get really scary when you start talking about losses, because people are like, oh no, is the church, unstable because we have a loss on our most recent income statement? And if there is a loss, don't panic. Because churches, especially with like how our cash flow is, um, you may not get enough money in a given month to pay for your expenses, and that is totally normal. Um, it's just the nature of how churches operate. So losses don't necessarily mean that your church is insolvent, or that, as a treasurer, you're not doing a good enough job. A loss, all it really is is that there are more expenses than there are revenue. Um, so again, that's a really important thing, especially when you talk with leadership, and leadership is more likely to pick that up quickly. But if you ever have to present to the congregation, that sometimes if you do have a loss year, that people might get really scared. And let's not panic. We'll use these reports and learn why this happened. The next really important part is going to be the balance sheet. And the balance sheet report, um, this one for folks that kind of just start up an accounting software and start entering things, your balance sheets can look kind of weird, just kind of out of the box. And that's okay. But balance sheets are still really important because they tell us two really important facts. How much do we own? Like, what are our financial resources? And then also, do we owe any money to anyone? And how does that affect like the stability of our church? So when you look at it, a balance sheet, again, just like the income statement, is going to have timestamps on it of like what is this report reflecting? Um, Again, to look at those headers and going back to our best practices about regular reporting, again, you want to make sure that those numbers match so you don't accidentally um, either maybe if you prepared the packet and forgot and attached last month's report. By having reports with dates on it, your council can be like, oh, this looks a little bit weird. So again, just a thing to keep us all operating correctly. The top half here, or top third, is going to be our assets. These are things that we own. Um, Most churches are going to at least have things like our checking accounts, our saving accounts. Maybe you might have a CD or an account with the Mission Investment Fund. They're going to sit up here. Um, Churches, um, we are starting to track our fixed assets, but that is something that for smaller churches, unless you've got someone that really, really loves accounting and talking about it, um, the important thing to track is your cash right here. Now, what does the church owe? These are going to be your liabilities. And most commonly, these are going to be things like maybe the church has a credit card, or you have a loan or mortgage with like your local bank or the Mission Investment Fund. Um, Also, if you another thing that people have heard when they think of liabilities, they'll think of like payroll liabilities. So if you use QuickBooks Online, where it kind of automatically does the payroll for you, you may see payroll liabilities being automatically put on there. Um, but those are things that like these are debts or things that the church has to pay. And then finally, the equity section, again, which is one of the confusing topics in all forms of accounting. This is going to describe kind of, is the church operating within its means? Meaning, when the church operates year over year, whether it has a surplus or it has a loss year, all of that gets added up and put into your equity accounts. So when you see your equity from like last year, we're going to change from, total equity of 70,000 to 27,000. What that simply means is that we've either accumulated more debt or we have a reduction in assets. Um, but these can kind of help tell the story of how the church's activities change over time.
One of the things that we did, if you go back just a second,
Oh,
um, is those assets, because councils rotate all the time, right? So what was happening is we had these different funds. We have a couple of different CDs. We had an endowment fund that was started in the 90s. We have some money invested in mutual funds. And finally, what I just did to make my life easier and our council members' life easier is I have a Word document that took these numbers and I just underneath every little fund just wrote a little definition of like the CD matures in August of 2026, or it's at this interest rate, or this endowment funds was started in the 90s with X dollars amount. And so it was just like a little narrative. because it made my life easier. Because every time I would do meetings with council, council would say, well, what's this money for? Can't we use that? Well, no, that was earmarked for something else. So it's just nothing fancy. It's a Word document that just gives a tiny little narrative for each of those funds.
Yeah. That's a that's a great idea. I might have to prepare some documentation for my council to help explain things.
Well, it just makes it easier because you don't have to keep going back and repeating yourself. And then if somebody was actually listening or not.
Yeah.
So,
So again, that equity section right here, um, the first bullet here is the definition that you need to take away. It's this the total of all the gains and losses since you started keeping track. Um, so it's an important metric to look on your financial reports. Um, but I also want to say that there's no one metric on the financial reports that you print that is like the sole metric to pay attention to. You kind of have to look at everything all in total. On the last bullet point, going back to my previous statement of if you have a loss year, like where does that loss come from? And a loss simply means that that built up of um, more revenue over expenses over years has just simply been spent down by this loss year. Um, Accounts and funds. Um, so these two kind of big accounting terms that we're going to learn about here. Accounts. You can think of these as categories or classifications of things. Um, some examples are going to be like the building repair expense or office supply expense, personnel expense, or utilities. Can also be used for revenue. So like loose offering, if you track that differently from pledged offering, electronic versus cash and check. So accounts are the categories. This is telling what happened. Now the other half here is going to be funds. And in the nonprofit world, we love funds. In fact, we have fund accounting, which makes everything more fun. But we can talk about funds simply as a purpose for money. So if you have a donor that says, here is $10,000 to improve the organ, what they have simply done is they have given a purpose for their $10,000. Now, an implementation of this you can do it kind of two ways. One, you can do it like physically separate. If you're a smaller organization, it might be easier to just you go down to the bank. You're like, all right, we're going to start raising money for a new organ, so we're going to have this, the organ fund checkbook, and we'll just track things separately that way. Um, in your accounting software, you can do it in QuickBooks or Icon. They just give you a way of kind of how can we separate this money from like the money that pays the pastor or pays the light bill. And the important thing to know is that funds allow you to kind of track that dollar all the way from getting it to then it going out and paying for something. Um, Real common examples are going to be your general fund, which is just the overall activity of the church. And then these other funds are going to be other special purposes, whether it's maintaining the building, um, your music ministries, or another really big one is like your youth. It's like they'll do fundraising and things like that. The big scary warning here as nonprofits, and one of our big responsibilities um, to our members here is that we legally must respect the wishes that a donor has for their gift. Um, in addition to kind of people behaving badly and embezzling the church, other nonprofits have really gotten into trouble by misusing specific funds that they've received. So if someone says, I'm going to use, I want this money to be used for this thing, you have to do that thing. A good resource on the governance side for kind of managing these things would be adopting a gift policy. Um, if you're if you're curious about that, I do want to plug the ELCA Regional Gift Planner. They would love to talk to your congregation about how can we create a gift policy. Um, so that describes how to accept cash, things like stocks, or if someone is like, I have an acre of corn that I would like to give you. Like, how can you accept that? When you set up your chart of accounts, it's important to know that there is a Goldilocks zone of what is the right number. And I can't tell you what that number is. That's a number that you have to kind of find on your own. Um, I do want to say that like the key to understanding what is the right number of accounts is, does this make my job easier? Does it make entering transactions easier? Does it make talking to the council easier? Because if you know that they're always going to ask questions about how much did we spend on, you know, Augsburg Fort on curriculum for our Sunday school? How much did we spend on ice melt? Stuff like that. Um, Also, it's really important when you create these charts of accounts that you want to describe what's happening, and really try to avoid kind of putting a transaction in an account just to kind of like make it fit. Sometimes I see with churches in their budgets that they're like, oh, there's money here in this line item, so we'll just kind of classify it there. And the problem with that is that when you kind of hide it in there, when future you or your successor looks at that 5 years down the road, it's going to be gone because it's hidden somewhere. So we don't want to do that. And then finally, that also goes to like miscellaneous anything. You can have miscellaneous because sometimes you just do. Sometimes you get a weird deposit of $4.23 because it was a rebate or a class action lawsuit winning that you got. So sometimes it is normal to have miscellaneous, but that's just a key to, when you see that, to be like, what is in this miscellaneous account? Budgeting. This is probably the next real important step, um, with kind of your treasurer work. I like to say that budgets are statements of values, meaning these are financial documents, or it's a financial process that says this is what our church feels is important. Like we want to have a well-paid, um, we want to have well-paid staff. We want to make sure that our pastor can take care of their family. We want to make sure that our youth can, um, come to Sunday school. We like to sit in the sanctuary in the winter and not be cold. So things like that. Um, but when you make them, um, there is guesswork. There is kind of an optimism or pessimism, when you come up with these numbers. There's no real magic way of you put these numbers in and then you magically get a budget. Um, and with that guessing, it's also important to say that like this is, um, I describe budgets as kind of like a map of like when you say I want to drive from here to Fargo, Google Maps is going to tell me the roads to take. And do I have to take those roads? I mean, not necessarily, but that map tells me the turns that I should take, but maybe there's road construction, so I have to do a different turn. And that's true with your budgeting, where you can be like, we've only spent this much money on heating oil for our church. But then all of a sudden, the petroleum market changes, or um, the insulation just, there's a leaky window that no one has thought to repair. And then all of a sudden, the heating bill has been just gradually rising.
Or
Um,
you get a statement from the insurance company that says they're raising the rate 7%.
exactly,
Those kinds of
exactly.
things.
So again, their plans, and be gentle. This is also my chance to give you permission to be gentle with yourself, because sometimes we'll make the best guesses that we can, but it doesn't work out. Like I paid for a seasonal snow removal contract when we had the lowest amount of snow in a season.
Right. Something that we've done when I took over kind of doing some of the finances for the church is I looked at history. And I think, a 1 year history is fine, but I think it's more telling when you look at it over time. So again, back to my fancy Excel spreadsheets is this year when we did the budget, I had every column accounting of expenses for 22, 23, 24, 25, and comparing what our budget was for 25 and then projecting for 26. So council members could easily look back and go, well, this account has always been runs around $5,000. So then it's kind of a no-brainer, and it has made our budgeting process easier because there's historical data there. On the last case where the individual opened up a credit card and had the credit card statement sent to her house, I would like to believe that if all of a sudden I saw because the expenses had to be categorized somewhere, right? Because money went out to the tune of 640,000. I would like to believe that if I saw that, man, those office supplies are really going up and we're paying way more for office supplies in 25 than we ever did in 22, like what's going on? So I would like to believe that maybe there might have been some flags that said something's not right.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and that's another important, um, yeah, to look at like when the budget doesn't match, that, um, yeah, that's a key for us to just ask what's going on? What's going on here?
Yeah.
That also really ties into kind of when I mentioned earlier about um, with churches not having consistent revenue. That's a every church deals with it. Many nonprofits deal with it. Um, But the important thing here is to understand that revenues and expenses aren't always going to be evenly distributed. Because your utility expenses might go up in the winter because of heating costs. And so you have to kind of account for those things, especially when planning for your budget. Um, and also when you look at revenue, just remember that typically your December is going to be anywhere from like uh, at least one to about 1.5 times your average sort of normal amount of revenue. Um, and with that kind of that variance that you'll see in revenue and expenses, um, consider electronic giving. Um, so tools like Tithely or Vanco um, can help set up your church to receive electronic giving, whether that's through their credit cards or their checking accounts. Um, People can donate one time, or they can set up recurring and automatic transactions. The recurring and automatic ones are really helpful for a church because then when you're again preparing these budgets, you can know that okay, when we go to Tithely and see what are our active transactions, you can kind of add up and see this is how much we're going to get. So in smaller or when I was a treasurer in another smaller organization, we actually had to look at our cash flow. So we had to like look at um, if April didn't have enough revenue, how would that affect the rest of the year in terms of our cash balances? So if your church ever is kind of worried about that, think about electronic giving as a way to kind of ease that um, the ability for your members to kind of support your congregation.
We really had stressed we use Vanco for Simply Giving, and we really went on a campaign, if you will, trying to get more people to sign up for electronic giving because attendance varies too. So it's not just giving, it's the summer months when we have more people that are gone on vacations or, the variety of things that happen during the course of a year. So that electronic giving really helps to kind of make it so there's less ebbs and flows of the tides, if you will. And I'll give you this other little pointer. Don't make it a barrier for them to sign up. It was a common comment when I first started taking over as doing some of the treasurer things when I was trying to get people to sign up. I was told by somebody that, well, they can just call the church office and get a form. Well, yeah, but then you just created a barrier that's one more step that they have to do. So I printed a whole bunch of copies and put it as people walked into the church. We've stuck it in with the annual report. And every so often it just starts to show up because we're trying to remove the barriers and make it as easy as possible for people to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good reminder. I like including that with the annual reports. That's pretty smart. We tried to use, I know I think Vanco has a template for like a pew card that you can even put into the
Ah,
backs of your pews for people.
okay. And we're just starting to dabble with text to give. So, because we've been doing more, Facebook types of things, and we're trying to figure out how to get the text to give number on our Facebook. So we're trying to capture some of the people that aren't necessarily in the sanctuary with us on Sundays. So
Yeah.
we're dabbling.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up text to give because we also have that, and I know our pastor here has kind of even used the text to giving as kind of like even a moment in worship during offering. Um, I'm a millennial, and so I think I have $14 in actual cash right now. So like if when I go to church, if I give automatically because then I don't have to think about it. But having that option to just, all right, I'll just text my offering now because I forgot my checks or I forgot cash at home.
Or Christmas Eve service when you have people that are visiting,
Exactly.
and they're not thinking offering, but then there's something that's written there for in the bulletin about how what do you text give. So we captured a few people for a Christmas Eve service.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, Paying people is the other like big important topic for
I
churches.
I asked my pastor if there was anything that I should tell anybody, in the course of this conversation. She said, "Can you just make sure that people pay the pastors on time? Apparently, it can be an issue."
Yes, yes. I also did the same thing too, and I asked our associate pastor, and he was like, "Yep, that definitely is the thing." So, again, we're not judging people. We're a law and gospel kind of people, and you need to pay people on time. Accidents happen, but every time. So just like the second bullet point on the slide is that you can always count on death, taxes, and payday. Um, so when you're paying people, um, if you do it by hand, I applaud you for your ability to do that. But for a lot of churches, it is worth the cost to pay to have the QuickBooks payroll do it, or you can have a service like ADP or Gusto or Patriot Payroll, or you may have like a CPA in town that they do that as part of their regular services. But yes, having someone who does payroll is going to be uh, a big benefit to your church. The other kind of hot topics that I want to express are classifying your employees is really important. Um, so you can't always just 1099 someone and say you're an independent contractor. The IRS actually has a series of tests to determine is this person a contractor or is this person should they be a W-2 employee? Um, and the other sort of like um, unfair thing is if you categorize someone as a 1099 contractor, and if they did not realize it when they file their taxes, all of a sudden they now have 15.3% of everything that they were paid that they somehow have to come up with. Um, so if your cleaner is 1099, just make sure that they know what that means, and also that they actually do have a business and not just because someone said 5 years ago you're a contractor. Around the Christmas time, this is an important thing to remind people that as much as we want to love and show our employees, and as an employee, I love getting them, but employers can't give like tax-free gifts. Whenever an employer gives their employee cash or anything of value, that is a taxable transaction. Not to say to discourage supporting your hardworking staff, but again, having a payroll service will know this, and then this way you can stay on the right side of how are we, conducting the business of our church. Also, employees can't donate time. Um, when I first read this, I was like, oh, that doesn't say that like um, your treasurer can't like volunteer and read on Sunday services. But what this is saying is that if you hire your church secretary and the church secretary can't be like, well, I'm just going to donate, these extra hours of time. If someone wants to, they should be paid, and then they can just simply give that money back. Um, that's the big thing here is that um, people have taken advantage of their employees by kind of saying this, oh, you can just donate your time. So again, we really want to be respectful of the people that work for us, and then also the law. And the other big topic with paying people is the pastors. Um, and I could go on forever about paying pastors, but that's another webinar. So paying your clergy is going to be complicated the first time setting it up. It gets better, but the other thing to realize is that the resources that you have at the Synod are there to help you. And if you're like, I feel so silly asking these questions, so many people have asked questions on how to pay pastors that they would love to help you set up um, your payroll system, or even if your payroll contractor is like this, how do I do this housing allowance? Know and use the resources that you have, like the Synod.
Cindy would love to help you. I've called them many times.
And now for your donors, because now we're in the kind of the first quarter of the year, it's important to send out those giving statements. That's a really important thing here. The IRS says that when you receive money from a donor, um, once you cross over $250, then you need to give a contemporaneous receipt. And that just says you have to give them a receipt before their tax return is due. But it's a really good practice to just do it by January 31st because your 1099s are due then, your W-2s have to be sent out to your employees by then. So it's just another one of those year-end tasks to clear up. Um, there are some important pieces of language that you need to have on your statements, though, to keep in mind. And that important language right here is going to be highlighted on your screen. And it just says, no goods or services were provided in exchange for your contributions other than intangible religious benefits. Um, the reason this is important is because we receive, well, for our donors, for them to count something as a donation, they have to give something without expecting anything in return. So, like when I go to the gas station and I buy a Diet Coke, I am giving Holiday Station Stores $3. In exchange for that $3, they are then giving me a Diet Coke. That is not a donation to Holiday. But for churches, I give my church my monthly offering, and I don't expect anything in return. Um, so that's how I can deduct that on my taxes. Um, and with that important sort of like getting something back, there's a question of fundraisers that's going to come up because our churches fundraise. It's very common to do that. Um, But when you track that sort of like fundraising activity, you want to track it separately. Um, and you can do that a couple ways. One, you can just not put it in your donor software. So if someone gives a check for your youth bake sale, just not recording it. But if you do have donors that want to see that, or you want to kind of like tell the stewardship story to your donors of like, this is how much, these are all the resources that you've helped our congregation receive. It's really important to note that fundraiser, I'm not going to, income from a fundraiser that you get from a donor is completely separate than their donations.
Typically, they're getting something for it.
Yeah.
A meal, or they're donating to the expenses of the trip, or there's something that they're actually kind of getting in return, greeting cards, or different things that the youth will do. That's a common one.
Yeah. Yep. So it's important to remember that if there's like an exchange going on, it's not a charitable gift. Um, okay, so here's kind of my potpourri of fun tax things. If you're a church in Minnesota, make sure you have you use your ST3, which is the form, so you can be exempt from sales tax on everything except prepared food, hotels and lodging, and I think cleaning services. Um, but it's important, like we got a discount on our phone service because we were tax exempt. So some of the Minnesota taxes were taken off. So use that to your advantage. And I'm sorry to our North Dakota friends that they don't get that big benefit.
We don't.
This is something that both on either side of the Red River can take advantage of, is what's called a qualified charitable distribution. Um, this is a big topic. So if you're interested, you can either Google it, send me an email afterwards. But for people who have an IRA, they have they can do this before they have to take their required minimum distributions. But if they have an IRA and they're at least 70 and a half, they can directly give the church money from their IRA, and they don't have to pay tax on it. So for folks that have of retirement income like that, they might not be able to itemize. So this way they can give and still get a tax benefit from it. Um, really echoing something that we talked about documentation, but like reimbursements. If your pastor asks for reimbursement for um, things that they have purchased, if they haven't provided a receipt, one, you shouldn't reimburse it. But
Receipts,
two,
remember?
yep, yep. But two, if you do, then that receipt, then that reimbursement then becomes taxable income. So really make sure that people bring their receipts. Um, and then finally, a monthly mileage allowance. So if you pay your pastor X number of dollars a month for mileage, just a flat fee, just know that some of that may be taxable. So that's something that I would really have you ask your local tax person to kind of get clarification on. Um, and the three big danger zones in terms of like receiving contributions from donors are one, um, do not ever put a value on a non-cash gift. Um, as the accountant here, I'm like, this makes sense. Let's move on. But
So Dory said, what does that mean?
yep,
And then Dory said, you mean if I give 50 pounds of potatoes to the Thanksgiving meal that you shouldn't tell me how much that's valued at? Did I say
exactly.
that right, Paul?
Yep, you got it. It's perfect. And so when you give a receipt for someone like that, all you have to do is say the quantity, the condition, and what the item is. So 50 pounds, could say,
No dollar value.
yep, 50 pounds fresh potatoes. I'm not sure used potatoes would have an issue, but
Right? That might be a little bad. But
yep.
anyway,
Also, individuals can't donate time. So if your church is maybe having some improvements done and you have a carpenter in your congregation that is like, I'll donate my time for this remodel that we're doing. One, thank them because that's just amazing. And with the church continues because of amazing, generous people like that. But two, you can't give them a document that says, um,
you worked for X
dear,
hours.
yep. You can't say that, dear Mr. Carpenter, you donated $5,000 worth of carpentry time. You just can't, that that's not a thing. And then again, what we kind of talked about before with that exchange of items, we want to make sure that we keep fundraisers separate from contributions. Um, Again, the biggest thing here is that we don't want to contribute to our members filing inaccurate tax returns because that can just become really gross and complicated and expensive to fix later. So
So I
that
guess
I
the
think,
big thing in the take homes is just that we have to have systems and transparency. Just what can we do to make our lives easier? What can we do to explain things to our congregation and our council to make it, as transparent as possible and having regular reporting receipts. We said receipts a few times and division of duties, should help. And hopefully all of those systems would have made our initial stories a little bit more difficult to happen.
and so our last slide here, it's got our contact information. Um, but I can see if there are any questions that we can go over with. Okay, someone asked, did we work with the bank to accept your electronic donations? Um, so we use Breeze, which manages kind of our members. And Dory, what software do you use?
We use Venco.
Okay, Vanco. So yeah, these are products that you can use with any bank. So you don't have to worry if you go to the bank and they're like, here's a merchant account. Actually, don't do that because it'll be really expensive.
Yeah, there was one member that actually did that and it got really confusing. And it was having something directly from the bank out of their bank account. So it's way easier because if you've got a system like the one that Paul's got or Vanco, you get a statement of here's all of the list of the people who gave. This is the date that you got the deposit, and it makes it much easier for tracking purposes.
Yep. And I'd also recommend with these electronic donations that you want to use tools like Vanco, um, Breeze, Tithely, um, and you don't want to do something like let's just like if you're the treasurer, well, I'll just sign up for like a Venmo account. Like don't if you want to do something like that or like a PayPal account, make sure you find out how to set it up as the church. Because like if I set up a Venmo for the church all of a sudden and we got $10,000, all of a sudden Venmo is gonna say, oh, Paul Hersta got $10,000. I'm like, no, 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 I didn't. So
Right.
again, have these set up correctly.
And the other thing I just ran into was with text to give, because you said that, was I had to do a compliance report about whether or not we kept people's credit card numbers on file.
Mm.
And so I learned a little bit about that because that becomes a whole nother can of worms with compliance. So if you go through these systems, you go through like text to give or some of these, they take care of that and they're the ones capturing those credit cards so that the church doesn't get in trouble for compliance.
Yep, yep, exactly. Um, Okay, someone did ask if we can give them an example of the spreadsheet that we use when we go back. It says 4 years, so I think, yeah, I think we'll get some resources off to our friends at the Senate, and they'll kind of package that up for you, so you can get that.
We can do that.
Um, okay, another person asked a question about if they donate money for the turkey dinner fundraiser, should that be separate from their donations? Um, this would be like an it depends. So if I know here our youth program, we collect donations ahead of our fundraiser because our youth director will be like, help us buy the pie. And so they'll be like, give us $50 for pie. That would be a donation because you're just giving it without expecting anything back. Now, if you did something like that the day of the fundraiser, it gets really,
Because
really
like if you went to the meal and got the pie, that's the different story.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, as long as there's like some separation and you can reasonably, a reasonable person would be like, oh, they didn't get something when they gave that money. Um, okay. So someone asked about checking accounts for some of their like ancillary ministries like Welka, Christian Ed, or quilting. Should that be on the church balance sheet? Um, and kind of my answer to that would be I think it would be a good practice. You don't have to do the bookkeeping for them, but at least get their balances up to date because the church's tax ID is going to be tied to that.
Right.
Um, and it also can prevent, again, like some of these embezzlement stories that we've heard about, someone making an account with the church's tax ID. So it's important to kind of like, you don't have to do their bookkeeping, but just get a regular balance update from them. I think would be really helpful for transparency.
And that could be a place where maybe we aren't as good about that because those accounts typically are fairly small. But at least when we've done our annual report, Welco will give a report and they'll give finances in their report at that annual meeting. So, maybe there's other ways that you can do it as long as somebody's looking at the accounts at some point.
Yep. Yep. That's 100% the takeaway that I want people to get is that this activity shouldn't happen in secret. Um, okay.
Is that everything?
I think that's it. I think that's it. So,
Well,
yeah.
hopefully everybody got a few tidbits that they can take back to their church and have some best practices. And I thank you, Paul, for doing this with me. It's been kind of fun.
Yes, likewise, Dory. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, now how do we stop the recording? Um,
Maybe we just end it.
yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks,
Okay.
Paul.
Thanks, Tori. You have a wonderful night.
You too.